the person who is reciting the poetry, he begins by mentioning, after sending salat and salam upon the Prophet ﷺ, he says that this is qasida, فَهَذِهِ قَصِيدَةُ اللَّامِيَّةِ لِشَيْخِ-الْإِسْلَامِ Ibn Taymiyyah, that this is the qasida, the compilation of poetry of Shaykhul-Isla Ibn Taymiyyah, and it is a flower from the ripe flowers of his garden. So this poetry is essentially one of the flowers of many of the ripe flowers from the garden of Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And he says that this is something by which a person can smell the fragrance. So that Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah can smell the fragrance and the beneficial effects of this flower from the flowers of the garden of Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And he says, but at the same time, just like it is a flower and of benefit to Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, it is also a thorn and a needle to in the throats of Ahlul Bid'ah wad Dalal. And this is because, even as we know, even the Quran, as Allah says about the Quran for the believers, it is huda, it is guidance and shifa and healing. But to the kuffar and munafiqeen, what is it? It is something that leads them. It is something that leads them further astray in their misguidance and their wandering and their blindness, because it doesn't guide them. So likewise, we see here that this compilation of poetry for Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, it is something that is guidance and light and fragrance. It guides them and it illuminates them. And for Ahlul Bid'ah wad Dalal, those who do not take their creed from the Quran and the Sunnah and the understanding of the Sahaba, rather they take it from something else, from ilmul kalam and from falsafa and from ra'i, from opinion and hawa and desire, then when they read the likes of this, it is something that enrages them. It is something that, it is a thorn and a needle in their throats. And so in this poetry, Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he announces openly the belief of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So he begins by saying, as we said, the first line of poetry, Ya sa'ili an madhhabi wa aqidati, ruziqa al-huda man lil hidayati yas'alu. So we see from this, which translates as, O one who asks about my madhhab, my way and my aqidah, certainly the one who asks for guidance will be bestowed with guidance. So the Shaykh Salih Suhaimi, Hafidhahullah, he comments, he says that here Shaykhul-Islam rahimahullah is addressing his Muslim brothers, because clearly this line of poetry indicates that he was asked by somebody or by a group of people to write and explain the Aqidah, so that they may believe in the same Aqidah. And this we see occurred frequently with Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, because his book Al-Wasitiyyah was written with because the same thing happened. His book Al-Hamawiyah was written because the same thing happened. Some people asked him from a certain region to explain the creed, At-Tadmuriyah. So we see that all of these books written by Shaykhul-Islam, we see that they were in response to people asking, what should we believe? And what would the Salaf were upon? And in what lies safety? And so on and so forth. And in what lies the protection from doubts? And so likewise, this compilation of poetry, Ibn Taymiyyah, in opening the first lines, he addresses the one who asked him, O you who asks about my madhab and aqidah. And the Shaykh says that we see that often many people, they may have doubts. There may be doubts, and especially those people who are put to trial by deviations in their aqidah, and they fall into innovations, and sometimes even they may fall into shirk. And so here Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah has intended to explain to them his belief. What is his belief? What has he inherited from, what is he taken from the way of the Salaf? So that it might become clear to them, those people, that what he believes, what he is explaining, is in agreement with the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the intent then is that in this poetry, Ibn Taymiyyah is going to clarify what is his aqidah. And also a point which is made by the other explainer, regarding this poetry, رُزِقَ الْهُدَى مَنْ لِلْهِدَايَةِ يَسْأَلُ, that when Shaykh-ul-Islam Taymiyyah says, the one who asks for guidance, he is bestowed with guidance. This is Ibn Taymiyyah making dua for the people who asked him, because the mention of this is also a supplication at the same time. So when Ibn Taymiyyah says, "Oh, he who has come, who asks me about my madhab and aqidah, indeed, the one who asks for guidance, he will be bestowed with guidance." Essentially, Ibn Taymiyyah is making dua for the person or the group who came and asked him to explain his aqidah to them. And so then the Shaykh says, Al-Aqidah, what is Aqidah? What is this word Aqidah? What does it mean? He says that Aqidah is anything that the heart binds firmly to. Anything that binds tightly to the heart, it is called an Aqidah. Irrespective of whether it is good or bad. Because the word Aqidah in and of itself doesn't indicate that something is true or false. So, for example, the Jews have an Aqidah. The Christians have an Aqidah. The Buddhists have an Aqidah. The atheists and materialists, they have an Aqidah. Aqidah simply means anything that is bound and tied to the heart. So even the atheist, the mulhid, the dahri, he has an Aqidah as well. Everybody has an Aqidah. So the word Aqidah is simply that which the heart is tied and binds fast to. So this means that an Aqidah can be fasida. It can be corrupt and evil. It can be batil. It can be corrupt and evil and false. And likewise, an Aqidah can be truthful. And so, for this reason, what we are interested in is what is the sound, correct, Sunni, Salafi, Athari, Aqidah, that the deen of Islam, that the Sahaba were upon, and that the scholars of Islam were upon. This is what we are pursuing. This is what we want to know. This is what we want to make sure that our hearts are embracing this specific Aqidah in all of its details. And anyone who turns away from this, then this person is upon khurafa, he's upon deviation, he's upon bid'ah and dalala. And so therefore the goal of every single Muslim is that he should be asking, what was it that the Sahaba believed? What was it that the Imams were upon? What was it that they said regarding Al-Qadr? What was it that they said regarding Allah's attributes? What was it that they said regarding Allah being seen in the hereafter? This is how every Muslim ought to be thinking. If every Muslim was to think like this, then inshallah by Allah's mercy, he would be guided to that which is correct. If he was truly thinking like this and he was seeking and pursuing that which is correct. So then the Shaykh explains that the madhab, what is the madhab? A madhab is simply a way that a person follows, a way or a path that a person follows. What path is he following? In fiqh, in the issues of jurisprudence, in suluk, in his behavior, in his ta'amul, in the way he deals with other people, in his ibadah, in his worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the rulings, in the ahkam, in the hudud. So this madhab is simply a way and a path which is followed. What way and path are you following in all of these affairs? In the issue of fiqh and ibadah and suluk and mu'amala and so on and so forth. This simply means a way that a man is following. And for that reason, we sometimes use the expressions, we might say that the madhab of the Salaf is such and such. Or the madhab of Imam Ahmad is such and such. Or the madhab of Imam Shafi is such and such. And what we mean by this is that this is the way of Imam Shafi. This is what Imam Shafi was upon in this particular issue, or in this particular matter, in terms of his belief, or in terms of his statement, or in terms of his action. And so therefore, a believer, as we said, that he is someone who seeks and pursues what was the madhab of the Sahaba, what was the madhab of the Imams of the Sunnah, what was their Aqidah, then he doesn't deviate from it, even to the extent of a fingertip. Not even a fingertip, forget even a handspan, not even a fingertip does he, deviate away from that. Rather, he bites onto it with his molars to the best of his ability. So after this, mentioning these opening few points, then the Shaykh, Hafidhahullah, he mentions that Shaykhul-Islam, who is he? He is Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah Rahimahullah. He died in the year 728 Hijrah, which is 8 centuries after Hijrah, in the 8th century after Hijrah. And Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he was present in a very unique time, in a very unique juncture in Islamic history. And for us to truly appreciate the benefit that Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has brought to this ummah, and in terms of all of the books that he wrote and the groups of innovation which he refuted, we have to appreciate and understand the time, the specific time that Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was actually born and lived in. And this was a time in the 8th century when we see that those groups and sects which emerged in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries of Islam. There were many sects, as you know. In the 1st century of Islam, there were the Khawarij, the Rafida, the Murjiya, the Qadariya. They were the 4 foundational sects which occurred in the 1st century of Islam. Then in the 2nd century of Islam came the poison of Ilmul Kalam, which is speaking about Allah, His names, His attributes, using the tools and language of Greek philosophy. This came into the Ummah in the 2nd century after Islam. And then there were groups which appeared who adopted this as their way. The Mu'tazila, the Jahmiyyah, the Kullabiyya, the Karramiyya, the Ash'ariyya, the Maturidiyya. They took this way and they developed schools of thought. And then, because of political factors and social factors and political factors, these schools of thought, they began to spread and acquire dominance and strength. And then we had other elements that came in from the Batiniyya, those who desired to demolish Islam from within. And they came and they brought philosophy to merge it with Islam. In the 4th century, in the 5th century, and they came and they established in Egypt, and they established a state in Egypt. And so all of these things were taking place in the centuries before Shaykhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, that he came, before he came. And what happened is that these people, after the Imams of the Sunnah had strength, because in the 2nd and 3rd and the 4th centuries of Islam, we know that the people of Sunnah had strength in the various lands. But from the 5th and the 6th century, this situation turned. And we saw that the people of Bid'ah, from the Ahlul Kalam, and from the people of Kalam mainly, that they gained strength in all the various Muslim lands. There are reasons that explain, there are historical reasons which explain why actually this was the case. And so Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he came at a time when the way of the Salaf wasn't really known to many people, even to the ulama, to the scholars in that time. There were many scholars who were born and they acquired knowledge of the hadith and the athar. But they acquired knowledge of these affairs at a time when those who were in the prominent positions were Ash'aris, people of Kalam, people of Tasawwuf, and so on and so forth. And so they acquired knowledge in this type of setting. And they didn't truly understand, and they didn't truly have a connection with what the Salaf were actually upon. And people like Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, even Ibn Hajar, who came after Ibn Taymiyyah, he was of this category of people. They came in this time. And so the way of the Salaf wasn't something that was really known. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he came, and as you may or may not know, that Ibn Taymiyyah was someone who had amassed an amazing library of books. He inherited books. He was someone who would, if he didn't have a book, he would borrow it and write the whole book by hand. And as a result of this, and books would come to him, as a result of this, he amassed thousands and thousands of books, to such a degree that the scholars today explain that there is hardly a book that Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, that, from the Salaf, except that they would have knowledge of it. And so one of the signs that they used, or that to establish that a book was in existence, is if Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned it in any of his books. Right? So this is how they find lost books from the time of the Salaf. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he inherited the knowledge of the books that were written by the Salaf, of the books of Imam al-Darimi, and the books of all the refutations that were written. He acquired them. They came to him, and from that he acquired knowledge of what happened to the ummah, of all of these innovations, where they came from. And he managed to know and understand the actual opinions of every single group and sect. Because not only did he read the books of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, of the Salaf, he looked into the books. The books came to, so he read the books of the Asha'ira. He read the books of the Maturidiyya. He read the books of all of the innovators and their figureheads, those who were writing and promoting their false beliefs. And from that he acquired an amazing encyclopedic knowledge about every single group, every single faction, to such a degree that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he says in one of his books, that there is no innovator who innovated a bid'ah except that I know his name. I know who it was, who originated that specific bid'ah, and what land he was in. This is a statement mentioned from Ibn Taymiyyah in one of his works. And so when Ibn Taymiyyah came in that period in the 7th and 8th centuries, then what he did is that he wrote and he defended and he revived, he basically connected the latter part of this ummah from the 8th century onwards. He re-established the connection back to the way of the Salaf. So it's as if he tied the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th and whatever comes afterwards, he tied it back to the 3rd century after Islam or the 4th century after Islam. He made that connection back. Why? Because through him we came to know of many of the books that were written by the Imams of the Salaf. We came to know of many of those books that we didn't otherwise have knowledge of. So therefore we see this connection was re-established between the first 3 generations and with what came after the 8th century by way of what Shaykhul-Isla Ibn Taymiyyah did, by way of his jihad in writing, defending, clarifying, explaining, refuting, and as a result of which he suffered a great deal of harms. He was imprisoned, he was oppressed, he was attacked, he was maligned. Why? Because he refuted every single faction. He refuted the philosophers. He demolished and destroyed them. He refuted Aristotle, Plato, and all of those from this ummah, or who ascribed to this ummah, who were using their philosophies from the Mutafalsifa, Ibn Sina, and Al-Farabi, and other than them. He destroyed all of them. He destroyed them in such a way that in fact he annihilated the very foundations of all of Western civilization today, which are basically the philosophy of the Greeks. So he demolished them. He demolished the Batiniyah, the group I mentioned in the 4th, 5th century, who came in order to demolish Islam. He destroyed the Ahlul Kalam in all of their different factions. The Ash'aris, the Mu'tazila, the Jahmiyyah, the Karramiyah. He didn't leave any single one of them. The Salimiyah, no matter how obscure they were, he demolished all of them. He demolished the arguments of the Qadariyah, the Jabariyah, the Jahmiyyah, the Khawarij. He demolished the belief of the Christians. He annihilated them. Al-Jawab al-Sahih liman baddala din al-Masih. Right? Not a single fraction except that he refuted them all, whether they are from Islam or whether they are not from Islam. And by way of that, by way of all of his books, he re-established, he made that connection again to the Tawheed of the messengers and the Aqidah that the Sahaba were upon. And so therefore, when we are reading or when we are studying these texts from Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, or when we are reading his books like Wasitiyah and Al-Hamawiyah and At-Tadmuriyah, and when we are reading his works like Manhaj al-Sunnah, which is a refutation of the Rafidah, or we are reading Al-Tis'iniyah, or many Dar Ta'arud, many of these other famous books that we have, what we are seeing is we are seeing a clarification and a purification of the Aqidah of Islam in that critical juncture in the 8th century, when all of the groups of Bid'ah had, they had domination, they had strength, they had clout, they had the leaders on their side. And so this is what we see Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah doing at that critical juncture in time. So as the Shaykh says here, that Ibn Taymiyyah, he died in the year of 728 Hijrah, and his jihad is ma'ruf. Ma'rufun bi jihadihi, bilisanihi. That he's known with his jihad by way of his tongue, and by way of his pen, and by way of his soul, his self, his soul. And likewise, he participated in the jihad against the Tartars and the Mongols when they came across the Muslim lands. And he defended the Aqidah. He affirmed the Aqidah of the Salaf. And he demolished the doubts of those who brought those doubts. So his pen was it was like basically something that was quick and rapid against, and something that, by which he wrote many, many books, and as a result of which the Aqidah and the Manhaj of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah became straightened and corrected in the affairs of Aqidah and Fiqh and Saluk and so on and so forth. And so this is Shaykhul-Isla Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. So this is about Ibn Taymiyyah, and then the Shaykh, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, he says that after Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he mentions this opening line of poetry. He then said that the one who seeks fiqh in the religion, any person who seeks guidance, any person who wants to be guided, that he is the one who will be guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will guide him to the Aqidah of the Salaf Salih. And so long as he asks about it, and he holds on to it with his molars, and he binds to it, and he proceeds upon it, then he is someone who will be upon this particular path. And then the Shaykh mentions an ayah in the Quran, الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ وَالشُّهَدَاءِ وَالصَّالِحِينَ وَحَسُنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا. That those whom Allah has bestowed upon His favor from the prophets, and the Siddiqeen, those who are truthful in word, speech, belief and deed, and the Shuhada, the martyrs, and the Salihin, the righteous, all of those are the best in company, best company. Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse 69. And then the Shaykh mentions that whoever deviates and swerves away from this way, then he is someone who is following a path other than the path of the believers. Then he mentions an ayah, وَمَنْ يُشَاكِكِ الرَّسُولَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمْ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. That whoever contends and disputes with the messenger, after guidance has been plainly conveyed to him, and he follows a path other than the path of the believers, who are the Sahaba, then we shall leave him in the path he has chosen, and land him in hell, or roast him in hell. What an evil refuge. Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse 115. And then the Shaykh mentions a line of poetry in which the poet said, فَإِنَّ كُلَّ خَيْرٍ فِي إِتِّبَاءِ مَنْ سَلَفٍ وَكُلَّ شَرٍ فِي إِتِّبَاءِ مَنْ خَلَفٍ. That indeed every good lies in following of who preceded, meaning those who came before from the righteous Salaf. And every evil lies in following the one who came in the Khalaf, meaning those who came afterwards. So those who came first, the Sahaba, all goodness lies in following them. And those who came after them, those who came after the Sahaba, and they innovated and they brought kalam and many of these other innovations into the Ummah, then every evil lies in following them. And so this brings an end to the Shaykh's commentary upon the first line of poetry. Inshallah, we'll end our lesson today here, because the time for Maghrib has entered. And so just to summarize then, we've really just come into the introduction of this poetry. And what we should take away from this lesson is that we should understand that the personality of Shaykhul-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, that, when we study the life and the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah, that there is a much wider context that we need to look at and observe and understand, from which we gain many, many different benefits in the things that we study, historical benefits and benefits in Aqidah and benefits in just really understanding the way and the manhaj and the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And so in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala, we hope to make a start on the first issue of belief, which is regarding the position towards the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. So with that, inshallah, we conclude today's lesson. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.